Great, looks like. All righty. I'll go ahead and start, I guess. So my name is Kurt Samson, and I'll be talking about collaborative storytelling as a tool to build fluency with young learners. In terms of my own context, I am a graduate student at NUFS, Nagoya University of Foreign Studies, and I'm working towards my MA in TESOL. I'm a curriculum developer and kinder teacher with No Borders International School, going on 4 years now. I think I'm starting my 4th year as a kinder teacher, but I do have 16 years of experience working with young learners. So before I came to Japan 7 or 8 years ago, I taught music. I taught classical guitar to all sorts of ages, as guitar teachers are wont to do. And so I worked with a lot of little kids, teaching them classical guitars that were too big for their bodies. And so that's actually how I got my start working with kids. Also, this is somewhat unrelated, but I am the former #1 ranked Magic the Gathering player in California and a published Dungeons and Dragons author. And these become somewhat relevant as we go in through our activities going forward. So let's see here. So what is collaborative storytelling, and how can it differ from other storytelling approaches? I want to take a second, and in the chat, I want to sort of get your ideas about storytelling and how you view it. So maybe a lot of us are familiar with storytelling reading from a book, which is great. We're going to have a presentation about that, which I'm really looking forward to as well. And of course, that's really important. But when I talk about collaborative storytelling, how do you think that the idea of collaborative story might differ from other storytelling approaches? I saw in Amy's chat some people had some ideas that I think were very similar to this concept. So maybe take 30 seconds and in the chat type what you think collaborative storytelling might mean. I'll see if I could find my little chat box here. Let's see, hold on. Let me go ahead and find my chat box before I. Yeah. Ooh, great. So I have been let's see here. Storytelling is a great way to bond with students. And Wayne talks about wanting to create an EFL D&D class for some time. And Leah talks about interactive storytelling. Great. Yeah, so these are all things that I've definitely used in my class. And in particular, when we're talking about collaborative storytelling, I am speaking of this idea of creating a narrative with your students where they can activate their background knowledge and stories that you've used in the past to create new stories together. And today I'll specifically be talking about 3 activities that I've sort of done with that. Of course, storytelling is endless. There's no limit to what stories can do. So these are just 3 ideas that I want to present to you and show you how I've used them in my own context. So why use it in your classroom? Well, it lets your students engage in creative second language use. A lot of times, especially with low-level learners, of course, you need to, scaffolding things for them, then modeling activities and having them repeat in chorus after you. Those are all very important for building up the basic language skills. But collaborative storytelling is really good for getting them to engage creatively with it and really have things come from their own background information and create things that maybe they didn't know they were able to create because you presented this activity or this game for them that they really enjoy. Let's see here. I went too far, but it also, like I said, it also encourages students to use their background knowledge and current communication competencies to engage in the play. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when kids are playing in collaborative storytelling or imagination play, they don't have to just be the character in the book. They could be anything, right? Someone could be a real good example of that recently is how all my kindergarten students love this anime called Kimetsu no Yaiba, or Demon Slayer, which is a popular anime here. And they love to emulate the actions of those characters in a lot of our gameplay. And so they're using their background knowledge, but then they're transferring it to their target language because they want to do the activity. And so they use that as sort of a scaffold for their activities together. And most of all, it leads to meaningful communication that creates like real memorable and shared experiences. And what I mean by that is when we play these games together, a lot of time what's really interesting is how they remember things that happen in these activities. In my context, where when we play a game where they tell a story, they'll recall the story later on, like remember the time we fought this dragon or this monster, as if it's something that they did together in a shared experience, but it's something that only happened because it was co-constructed in our sort of shared imagination space. And now Grant, Grant, yeah, thank you for that link. So Grant does have a good comment about books.com, which I do recommend very highly. That is an excellent website. And Chris mentions that storytelling itself is very captivating. And yeah, I agree. Storytelling is so important as not just teachers, but as human beings. I think a lot of us are narrative teachers. And there's a lot of writing about that too. If you read about Joseph Campbell and all these writers who talk about myths and myth making and how it affects us as humans and informs sort of what we do, those are important. But that's beyond the scope of today's presentation, which is about storytelling activities. Now, the three activities I want to talk with you about today are story dice, simulations, dramatic play, and tabletop role playing. Simulations, I think a lot of people might be familiar with. That's when you put your students in a situation and they do stuff together, usually pretending to take on a role. Story dice, you might also be familiar with. I think some schools, raise show of hands, is anyone familiar with story dice or use them in their own classrooms? Great. So David, David and Martin, I might be calling on you at some point during this presentation for a little bit of help to present how to do this. And then tabletop role-playing games, which I think Wayne mentioned he was also interested in doing. Now with tabletop role-playing, it's something that's very popular in America right now because there's kind of been a movement, as I might say. But if you're not familiar with it in Japan, I think the Japanese terminology for it is gokosobi, I think, if I'm saying that right, gokosobi, so pretend play. So a lot of the things I'll be talking about have to do with this idea of pretend play, gokosobi. So story dice. So story dice can be bought from educational supply stores. However, you can also download a free app on your iPads as well, or your iPhones. I actually have one right here. So I have it, I can show you if you see in the chat. Looks like this. Where's my camera? That. So all you have to do is like roll it around, and it's a free app with ads. You could also spend $1 to get it. And the way I use this with my students is I would get I would have 2 iPads and they would roll. And in small groups of 3 or 4, I would have the students choose select a selection of dice, and then they would. Oh, sorry. Amy's asking what's the name. The name is Story Dice. So if you just look up Story Dice, if you have an iPhone, is that what you're asking, Amy? Just want to make sure. Yeah. So if you look up Story Dice, hold on. I messaged Wayne directly. Here you go. So yeah, just look that up in your iPhone or iOS app. And what I would do is I had the students in small groups select a set of dice, and I had a 5-page template for a storybook that would fold into 5 pages. And then each student would sort of select a dice and say a sentence, and they would construct a short story together. And then after they do it, they would write it down in their notebooks. Then I would help them, correct some things and so on. And then they would write it down into this template, this notebook. So you can see here, this is an example of a student writing a story based on this story dice prompt. So their first sentence was, once upon a time, there was a tent, because they're happy. Oh yeah, so Wayne mentions Rory Stories Cubes. Thank you very much, Wayne. That's really good. Now for these students are 6 years old, between 5 and 6, so they're kinder students. And they also, I also have done these activities with younger students, our K2 students, which are between 4 and 5 years old. But yeah, if basically you get them into situations where they take turns selecting the dice and telling stories, and then they write it down, and then they have a mini storybook that they created together. So like I said, every single picture in this story has to do with something that was on the dice. So they said people came outside and they ate snacks, and so on. And so, yeah, and then they wrote the story down, and they're able to share it with each other and with their teachers. Wayne also mentioned, yeah, you could also have your students make story dice themselves. That's another activity you can do 100%. So if you've never used story dice before, I want to do a quick sort of role play on how to do something like this. So I'm going to start. This is an example of what you might see from a story dice selection. So let's see here. I'm gonna have my little pin here, and I'm gonna start by saying, once upon a time, let's see here, there was a very hungry dog. So there was a very hungry dog. So I'm going to write down that there was a very hungry dog. Let me see if I can circle that. So that's our story. Our story is about a dog. So I'm going to tag someone. Wayne, I'm going to tag Wayne, and he's going to give us the next sentence using one of these dice. So Wayne, good. Are you there, bud?
Yes, I am.
Wayne, would you like to give us the next sentence in our story after once upon a time there was a very hungry dog?
Oh, well, there's a picture of a pizza there, so.
Ooh, yeah, that is one. So what do you think? What's your sentence?
Hungry dog, and he ran into his owner's house and stole a hot, steaming pizza.
Okay, so he ran into the owner's house, and he stole a hot steaming did you say plate of pizza or pan of pizza? Well, thank you, Wayne. That was the second sentence. And let's do one more. Wayne, can you call on our next storyteller? It could be someone in the room. I might suggest Martin or
Martin's voice. Martin's voice, please.
Oh, hello. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, Martin.
Okay. All right. So the dog ate the pizza, but that pizza had been there for a really long time, so he felt sick. So I'm gonna go with the sad face. He felt sick and had it. There you go, sad face there.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh, so you got sick for the pizza. Oh, that is a very sad dog. And let's do one more. Martin, call on one more sad soul that wants to join us in. Join the story. Who do you think? Who do you think?
I'm gonna pick my friend Lisa. There she is.
Hey, Lisa, you want to share a story idea with us?
He got sick, and he started to see stars around his head. I'll go with the star.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, and it's actually what Lisa did there. What's like I would have never thought of that, and students do that all the time. They'll create these free associations with the dice that you might not even expect, and they might surprise their classmates and themselves. But no, thank you very much, guys. That was great. So just like that, it's easy to get you don't have to even just use the app if you don't have the dice on you. Although the dice are better, you can also do a printout of something and give it to your students in groups and see what kind of stories they create together. And then if you have time, creating a structure where they can then sort of revisit the stories for recursive practice and write out the story that they just told is also excellent writing and reading practice for them. So that is story dice. Moving on. Let's see here. Let me get rid of my little tool here. That is all right. So Kevin's asking what's the best number of students to use story dice with. Obviously, you want to have like turns with students. I've done it with groups of between 3 to 5. I find that 3 or 4 usually works best. Ideal would actually be pairs, because if you have pairs, you could just have someone tell it and the other. So if you do this with pair work, I think that's actually kind of ideal depending on the time of your classroom. But depending on how strong your students are, like for example, in this context, I had a class of 7 students I was doing this with. And so I had 2 students who I really identified as being strong storytellers. And so I had one go into each group and then had a group of 3 and group of 4. But unfortunately, the group of 4 ended up breaking down to 2 groups of 2, and they ended up doing their own thing. So I think 2 pair work is probably one of the best uses of this, but I think 3 or 4 also can work pretty well. Thank you for the question, Kevin. So moving on, simulation. So simulations are great activities to encourage role play and practice familiar structures in authentic and even novel ways. So one simulation I did this year was a talent show, which is sort of a la American Idol or Neezy Project. If anyone's familiar with that band, I just want to make you happy. The current famous popular pop band in Japan. And my students are really big fans of it. And we had to put on a school play. So in order to create sort of a background information for it, we did a simulation where I created realia for them. They had little notes of participation cards on their chest, and then some students were hosts, some students were judges. They had little plastic microphones, and I kind of once we understood the roles, I sort of let them loose. I didn't necessarily give them any structures. I kind of let them use the English level that they currently had and their background information to engage into the activity. So here's actually a video of what that looks like. So in this video, you'll see the 3 boys standing to the left are participants in a music group called The Writers. or I'm sorry, they're called the dancers. I forgot that. I think they're called the dancers. So their dancing group is called the dancers. And then these two girls here are the host, and the children sitting at the tables are the judges, kind of like your Simon Cowell or your J.Y. Park. So this is them interviewing them and asking them to perform in a talent show. Big voice. So he's saying he's using the song from BTS, which I think a lot of you guys know, which is Dynamite, and they start to dance to it. You ready? So you see from the language, it's very free and liberated. The student says, "Oh, that's really good," and they're asking each other questions. I don't necessarily have to prompt them to ask it because of the situation. They're able to communicate with each other in authentic ways, just based on the situation and their background knowledge of being familiar with these kind of programs and these musical performances. And notice too that even students who are sort of in the spotlight are still watching and kind of engaged because everyone's still co-constructing the story. And then similar to the story dice, I still use this activity as a background information for writing. So we also wrote a storybook based on this. And then we also wrote a script, which turned into their school play of all the students pretending to be, in a talent show. So we're not going to do it. Oh, hold on. We're not going to do a simulation of that because I think a lot of people are familiar with simulations, but I do encourage you to use it as much as possible in your own classroom whenever possible. And lastly, something I've done with my students are tabletop role-playing games. And I think Wayne mentioned that he is a big fan of Dungeons & Dragons. And so this is something I do with my students a lot. In my classroom, colloquially, we call it the dungeon game. And it's something I do with them mostly because they love to do it. Now, can everyone hear me? Am I frozen? Hang on. Can someone give me a Sorry about that. Can everyone hear me now? Sorry, was I gone? How long was I gone? What was the last? Did you guys? 2 minutes. Okay. Well.
Chair.
Okay, great. Well, just to recap, so the another activity I did with my students was tabletop role playing, which Wayne mentioned being something that he was interested in. And yeah, so colloquially with my students, they call it the dungeon game. So it's kind of a free form of a tabletop role playing of pretend play that I often do with my students. And the cool thing about these activities is they can be as complex or as simple as you like. So this is kind of a complex example that you see that I've done with my students, where I created a situation where the students were on a space station and they were these different space heroes trying to save somebody from a monster. But I also often do these activities with just a whiteboard and markers, or I'll have like little chips and I'll just play with it that way. So if you have any experience with these kind of games, simplifying it for your students is a really good activity to for young learners to sort of engage in a kind of play with each other that's lets them engage in storytelling. But the big thing I did this year with my students was creating rotating narration roles. So usually in these kind of games, there's usually one narrator who's telling a story to a lot of characters. But what we would do in this game is I would every 3 minutes rotate the narrator. So the students would also take turns being narrators, sort of in control of the story, engaging with other students to say what happens in the story. So on the left, you'll see an example of the prompt that I use with my students, where they'll have a narrator card. So the student who is Oh, and so far as asking what age I'm using this is for 6-year-olds. So I'm doing this with 6-year-olds and between 5 and 6-year-old students. I just did it at the end of last semester with a class of 5-year-olds just once, and they loved it. They keep asking, when are we going to play the dungeon game? When are they going to play the dungeon game? And it's something that I'm like, all right, I'm planning it. We'll do it next week, and so we'll figure it out. So yeah, they're pretty young as far as learning goes, so between 5 and 6. But I've also done these games with elementary school students who love it quite a bit as well. Now, Wayne mentions that there's some cooperative games called like Forbidden Island. There's a game Martin mentions called Little Wizards. I also play this game with my elementary students called it's called No Thank You Evil, which is a game that I often use as reference and that my students like as well. It's a little more time consuming, but it's something that I play with them when I can. But this simple version of these kind of games, I have a narrator card and hero sentences. So the students would rotate the use of these cards so they can know what kind of things that they can say when they're playing. And of course, as me, even if I'm not the narrator, I'm still, am I frozen again? All right, there you go. I see. And even if I'm not the narrator, I'm still helping them be the narrator if they're taking on that role. So this is an example of that kind of play that I'm doing with my students, where the students are navigating a space station and opening a door. Can everyone see this video? Martin, is that okay? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. The door opens. Oh! There's something in the room. Yeah. What are you doing here? He thinks out his space club, and he tries to. Oh, let's see who goes first. Let's do the paper. 1, 2, 3. Up. First is Lisa. But up. My time's up. Next is your turn. Okay, you're gonna narrate. So now I'm. What's my name again? I'm Shimajiro. Yeah. So here the student is becoming the narrator on my left. So my time was up, and I'm helping them be the narrator, asking the other students what to do. And another student will ask, oh, I'm going to fight the monster, or I'm going to open the door, and so on. So that way we're sort of freely developing the narrative together, but we have sort of the shared table space that we can interact with and sort of see where their quote unquote characters are, and so on. And then similarly, just like I did for the other activities, we still use it for collaborative storybooks. So this is an example based on that adventure. I created a cover called Space Station Rescue, and then every student created a page from the adventure where we would storyboard it together and share the experience that they could then revisit. So after they wrote the story together based on the things that happened in that adventure they created with me, then we wrote the storybook, they put it on the bookshelf, and then they could share it with their other classmates or with other teachers and sort of revisit the adventure in story written form. Now we don't have time. My time is almost up here in 3 minutes. There are some pros and cons for these activities, which I write here. It is a lot of fun for your teachers, and it's pretty easy to set up once you get used to it. And even though the situation is imaginary, it engages students in a lot of communication. They're just talking and having fun playing a game, but they're talking and using a lot of the English they know and learning new vocabulary as well. But the cons are, since it's so open-ended, it does take a lot of time. So it is more appropriate if you have a lot of time with your students. I'm lucky because in my context, I teach kindergarten. So I would have like a full hour with them like every day to do stuff like this if I wanted. But this is also not the only thing I did with them. I would, of course, do standard reading activity, grammar exercises, etc. But this is kind of an activity they did as a treat every few weeks because they kept asking me for it and they really love it. And it's something that they had to look forward to whenever they came into my class. And then the other difficulty is sweet spot in terms of time. Sometimes it's between 3 and 7. My sweet spot for people is 3 and 7, but you could get more creative with your groupings, like having two students control a character together, and usually that works pretty well. And you also kind of have to be a confident storyteller or improviser, or learn how to be. Of course, everyone, it's a skill like any other. So if you're not confident in it, but you love stories, I still recommend giving it a shot because I think it'd be a lot of fun. So yeah, Alan is asking, are these kids much higher than typical Japanese kids? Yeah, I would say so, because they've studied with me for 2 or 3 years in the international kindergarten. Several of them have. One of the students in that actually started from zero English the year before, but she has a lot of exposure to English because she's there, much more than a student who only goes to Nagoya for 2 or 3 hours. So can you give more examples of simulations that you have done, please? Yeah, I've done simulations with my students where we've built, for example, at Christmas time, I would print out pictures of places in Santa's village, and then I would take 10 minutes and kids would build parts of Santa's village, like Santa's house, Santa's train yard, and then the North Pole. And then students would then do it that way, would pretend to be in Santa's village. But I'm out of time. So if you'd like to talk more about this stuff, we could create a breakout room, or you can email me here at Kurt-Samson@noorders.jp. If you love storytelling or these kind of games, I'd love to talk to you about it too, because I have a lot of fun with it and like to share materials. So if you want to share any materials, I'd be happy to share stuff I've created with you if you're interested in anything in particular. Okay, so that's my time. Thank you very much, everyone.